Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Danny Taylor, co-owner of Vegan Proteins online coaching company. So normally we talk about diet, we talk about training. Today we're going to be talking about clothing. So listen up, a little bit different, but I think this is a valuable video for a lot of people. So for a lot of people, one of the fastest ways to ruin your day is to go clothing shopping. Trying to figure out your sizing, the lighting in the dressing room, constantly feeling like you're not going to find something that fits you and looks nice on you is not a very fun way to spend an afternoon. So I hear this all the time, that somebody was actually feeling pretty good about their body and then they went clothing shopping and they left feeling like crap. So I get the question a lot, why doesn't my body fit the clothes? And the answer is that your body was never supposed to fit the clothes. The clothes were supposed to fit your body. So today we're going to be talking about why it seems like you can never find clothes that fit you. And in order to do this, we're going to need to take a little history lesson. So if you go back a couple of 100 years, you couldn't just walk into a store and buy an article of clothing off the rack. In fact, most people couldn't buy clothing at all. They learned how to sew. This was a very important skill hundreds of years ago, to know how to sew so that you could make clothing for yourself and for your families. And although some of the clothing was kind of rudimentary, because it was made for the person's body, it generally fit pretty well. And then of course, there has always been a wealthier class, am I right? And they could afford to buy clothing. But even they were not walking into a store and buying it off a rack. They were hiring a tailor to tailor make clothing to their bodies. If you think about fairy tales in history, kings and queens had their own tailors to make clothes specifically for them. So everything fit them like a glove because it was made specifically for their bodies. And in fact, it did actually stay this way for a really long time. I bet a lot of people watching this video are old enough to have a grandmother who made all the clothing for her children. That was actually really common as little as, 70 or 80 years ago. And now it's kind of like this rare hobby someone might do for fun. Certainly not out of a necessity. But standard sizing didn't even exist in the United States until fairly recently. So men's standard sizing was probably first developed during the Revolutionary War, and it was used by the American Army in 1812 to make ready-made uniforms. So I can kind of see how in the context of war, it makes sense because they couldn't possibly be tailor-making uniforms for every single soldier. They would make them in standard sizing with easily alterable areas like the hems of the pants and things like that. And because this was so successful, the same approach was attempted on women in the early 1900s, using solely the bust measurement as the measurement for scale. Like that's what it was based on, just the bust measurement. So I'm sure you can imagine this was very unsuccessful because women have a lot more variety to their body shapes than men generally. So this was a big problem for mail order companies, and several attempts at predictable standard sizing was made. And in 1940s, Ruth O'Brien and William Shelton received a grant to conduct the most ambitious study ever to solve the problem of standardizing sizing for women's clothing. Their team measured nearly 15,000 women across the United States. After they did this, they discovered that the diversity of women's actual sizes came out to produce 5 to 7 different body shapes, only 8% of which had the traditional hourglass shape, which is important. We will come back to this. Using this, they came up with a 3-part sizing system. Each size would be a combination of a single number representing an upper body measurement, plus an indicator for height, plus an indicator for girth. But this basically meant that there were 9 different sizes for each upper body measurement, which wasn't practical for manufacturing in those days, and it was rejected. So the biggest study in history, rejected, because it wasn't practical. Then in 1958, the Bureau of Standards invented a new sizing system based on the hourglass figure, remember the 8%, and using only the bust size to create an arbitrary sizing standard ranging from sizes 8 to 38 with like a height indicator on the size. So the resulting commercial standard wasn't very popular and was declared voluntary in the 1970s, which means companies didn't have to do it if they didn't want to. And then it was completely withdrawn in 1983. Then we got the small, medium, and large sizing style, right? That came out in around the 90s, and that is actually even more arbitrary. And then in 1995, the ASTM International published its own voluntary standard, which has been revised since then, and it was never widely adopted. So, not only is there no standard sizing across the United States for women, but oftentimes the sizing is different from store to store, and even worse than that, it's different from brand to brand within the same store. So no standard sizing methodology exists. For women especially. Men kind of have the inches on their sizes, but even that has changed quite a bit over time. It's better than what we have, but it's still not great. So what can we take away from this? I think that it's just amazing that in a study of 15,000 American women, they could not create or find any pattern clear enough to come up with standard sizing. And it's worth noting that that 15,000 women wasn't even a true slice of American women. The women were offered a stipend for the study, so they were paid for the study, which meant that most of the women who showed up were poor or underprivileged, and likely therefore hungrier and thinner than wealthier women. And they were all white. Yes, the kicker is that in the 1940s, just 75 years ago, they threw out all of the information on women of color who showed up for this study. They showed up, but they just disregarded all of their information, which is both horrifying and unsurprising. But suffice it to say that if they had included that data from women of color, there's a good chance they would have found a few more body types in addition to the 5 to 7 body types that they found. And can we talk about the fact that only 8% of women had the hourglass shape, meaning the bust and the hips were relatively equal inside and the waist was significantly smaller, creating this shape. We know what an hourglass shape is. 8% of people had it. 8%. But then in 1958, they created a sizing chart that based everything off of an hourglass shape. Now, although that system was rejected eventually, I still find that to be what a lot of companies use as their standard shape today. So you can see why everybody had tailored clothing for so long. Clothing was an investment back in the day. It was expensive, and because of that, people didn't own a lot of it, and they took really good care of it for years. But it is a very different world now. The consumption of clothing in the United States has gone up 400% in the last 20 years. In the 1980s, the average woman bought 12 pieces of clothing in a year on average. And now that average is 68 pieces of clothing per year. The average American generates 82 pounds of textile waste every single year. So this means we're buying a lot of clothing, and also it's cheaper than it's ever been. How is this possible? If you look at the price inflation of clothing since 1913, you can see that for years and years and years, it was going up at like the pace of everything else, right? But in the last 20 years or so, not only has the price increase of clothing not kept up with the pace of inflation, it has decreased significantly. So this means that we are mass producing clothing at breakneck speed to the point where it borders on disposable. And do you really think that companies that are doing this are putting their best effort into making sure that their clothing fits a wide variety of body sizes and shapes? Of course they're not. When it comes to capitalism, all hail the bottom dollar, and the way that we increase the profit is to decrease the production costs. So where are the corners being cut? They have to be being cut somewhere. First, I want to point out that they are obviously cutting labor costs. The vast majority of clothing on the shelves right now is what we call fast fashion. It's produced incredibly unethically and sold for a very cheap price, and the people are being paid like absolute slave wages to create this clothing that barely lasts a season and gets thrown away. So that's the first thing. Fast fashion is a human rights nightmare. And I'm not shaming anyone for having fast fashion in their closet. I do. times are tough, inflation and rising cost of living are killing us all, but that doesn't change what I just said. It's still true, and it's in our best interest to make the best choices that we possibly can. But when it comes back to clothing fitting you, right? Where are the other places they're cutting costs? They're cutting costs in quality. So that could mean everything from like the cheapness and crappiness of the fabrics that they're using, which is why these clothes fall apart so quickly, but also the way that they are creating their sizes is much cheaper. So historically, when companies made their patterns, they would use a model. An actual human woman would show up and they would basically build the clothes to fit her. If you've ever heard of sample size, this is what they're talking about. And ideally, if they were making a wide variety of sizes, they'd get a few different body shapes and sizes in there to measure them and create the patterns. But that's expensive. You have to pay someone to show up and do it. You sometimes have to pay multiple people, and they don't want to do that. So it's a lot cheaper to just use one person and then just scale that pattern up or down. So basically the shape of a size extra small could be the exact shape of a 2XL, just bigger, and you call it a day. But then with fast fashion, a lot of times they're not even doing that. They're not even bringing in one person to create the shapes on. They're literally just using patterns from other things. And if you've ever made a copy of a copy of a copy and seen how much worse it gets, this is what is happening with the sizing. So what does that mean for you? It means that we need to let go of this idea that our body needs to fit the clothes. When the clothes were never made to fit our bodies in the first place, they couldn't possibly be on a mass production scale. So please try to be kinder to yourself in the dressing rooms and recognize that 92% of women, remember, those are the ones that are not the 8% that have the hourglass shape, they are having a similar experience in their own dressing rooms. The thighs on something fit great, but the waist gaps, or the chest fits fine, but your arms are swimming in the garment, or everything fits great, but the bottoms of the pants are dragging on the floor. We need to recognize the fact that all of our bodies are unique. It's not just something that you can put on a mug and call it a day. Like, it's really true. Study of 15,000 women couldn't find one pattern. All of our bodies are unique. Even the ones that might look similar at first glance usually aren't similar enough to have one size fit everybody or one shape fit everybody. And we cannot expect our bodies to fit clothes that were never really made with our bodies in mind. Also, I want to add in my own niche of working in the fitness industry that fit women that have some muscle on their frame also are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to finding clothing that fits. There are problems with using the same pattern for women who are an extra small and an extra large, even without any added muscle to the frame. We've already seen how that's problematic for a long time. But now you go ahead and add extra muscle, and I don't think they've ever used a woman as a model that had well-developed lats or shoulders or built glutes. So the irony is that you could be working so hard to sculpt the body of your dreams, and it's still so easy to walk into a dressing room and feel like your body is a failure because it's not fitting into XYZ clothes. I can't stress this enough.
It's not you, it's the clothes.
What do I personally do to combat this? Because every single time I put on a blazer, I feel like Tommy Boy in that one scene. I have busted through many a shirt doing this in my life. If something is gonna fit my waist, it is not going to fit my arms. And if something is gonna fit my arms, it's gonna be way too tight across my back. And I have yet to find a single pair of jeans that has a perfect fit on both the waist and the legs. So I'm also not immune to feeling like crap in a dressing room. This has absolutely happened to me, but I've found a few things that really help me personally, and maybe they can help you too. When you're buying clothes, try to buy clothes that have some forgiving fabrics in them, with a little bit of stretch, a little bit of give. And I know that sometimes these fabrics, they can seem like cheaper, like not as high of a quality as something that doesn't have synthetic elasticy fabrics in it, but they can fit you so much better And I don't like clothes that don't have any give in them at all. I find it to be very uncomfortable. So I rarely buy clothes that are uncomfortable to me. If I put something on, even if it looks good, if it feels bad, I'm not wearing it. It's not happening. So next is that I've learned what cuts of clothing both look and feel good on me, and I think both are equally as important. It has to look good, yes, but it also has to feel good. So you will almost never see me in a short sleeve shirt. It's either long sleeves or no sleeves for me. It doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good on my body. Halter style tops look pretty good on me. Spaghetti style tops do not. And halter tops feel good, and spaghetti strap tops do not feel good on me. So it's really important that you figure out what cuts of clothing look and feel good on your body. It's going to be different than mine. And then stick to those things. So this also helps you to not fall down the rabbit hole of trends. Constantly chasing whatever type of fashion is trendy at the moment is a surefire way to make sure that you have clothing that doesn't look good on you, doesn't feel good on you, is going to be completely dead in a year, and you're never going to wear it again, and you're going to end up donating it to a thrift shop and thinking that's a good thing, even though like 80% of clothing that's donated to thrift shops just gets thrown away. It's literally like saying, here, you throw this away for me most of the time. So when something looks good on you, it's going to be in style forever, because looking good in your clothes is always in style. Now, please don't take fashion advice from me.
Fashionista, I am not.
But, when I was younger, I would buy stuff because I thought, I've seen it and I was like, oh, that's cute. I want to try that out. And then I'd get it. It didn't look good on me. It didn't feel good on me. And then it was like very clearly out of style within 18 months and never got worn again. Find clothes that work for you and look good on you and feel good on you, and it'll always be in style. My next piece of advice is to learn some basic sewing skills. So you don't have to be fancy with it. I'm certainly not. I don't even use a sewing machine. But knowing how to make small alterations to your own clothes can really make things fit so much better than they otherwise would. Like I mentioned, I've never found a pair of jeans that fits me in both the legs and the waist, so I have learned how to sew an elastic band. I actually have it right here. Yep, here it is. I keep it in my bedside table. I have learned how to sew an elastic band into the waistband of my jeans to get them to not gap at my waist. It costs me about 15 minutes to do it. This whole roll, which could probably do like 6 or 7 pairs of jeans, is like $3. And it makes my jeans fit me like 10 times better because of the simple sewing skill. So I highly recommend learning how to make basic alterations. Lastly, for your nicer pieces of clothing, like dress clothing or formal wear, anything you anticipate having and keeping and wearing for the next 10 to 20 years, I do recommend getting it tailored. So I know tailoring is very expensive, and I don't recommend it for all of your clothing because often tailoring can cost more than the piece of clothing itself. But for your nice dresses and suits, paying $10 to $30, depending on what the alteration is, to tailor it to make it fit your body well is going to set you up for feeling more confident on these dressier occasions for sometimes decades to come. I have tailored dresses that I've been wearing for over 15 years now. And I still wear them because I'm also not afraid to repeat an outfit. Let me get that straight. But when you end up doing this, even though it's more expensive up front, you often can end up saving money in the long run because you're not going out constantly trying to find piece after piece after piece to find the piece that fits you perfectly when, quite frankly, it may very well not exist. My last piece of advice is when you find something that fits you well, buy several of them. So a piece of clothing that fits you well is not an easy thing to come by. So if you find something and you like it, buy several of them, buy it in multiple colors if you want to. I currently own 5 pairs of identical colorful koala leggings because I love them. So next time you are in a dressing room and you're struggling to get something on or disappointed in the way something looks on your body, remember that it's nothing that's wrong with your body. It's just that these clothes were not made for your body. And I know that it's really hard in the moment, but again, try to remember that a study with a grant, lots of money behind it, of 15,000 women's bodies, and a single pattern of sizes couldn't be developed from that. And the sooner you start to really internalize that message, the easier of a time you're going to have when you're clothing shopping. So try to keep these things in mind. Reach out. Let me know your experiences clothing shopping. Has anything helped you when you're in the dressing room to feel better about the experience? What are your tips and tricks? I know everybody's got them, so leave them below. If you like this video, go ahead and like the video. Hit like, subscribe, the bell, all the things I'm supposed to tell you to do at the end of a video, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.